Welcome back to our news bulletin. We start from Afghanistan, where both Ashraf Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah have announced to hold parallel swearing-in ceremonies as future president of the country. The Election Commission declared Ghani the winner of September 2019 polls 5 months after the elections amid accusations of electoral fraud. But Abdullah rejected the results, saying he has won the majority and will form an inclusive government. The Kabul government says preparations for President Ghani's oath-taking ceremony were completed and the event will be held on March 9th. Meanwhile, Abdullah's office says he will assume the role of president on the same day. The oath ceremony was scheduled for last month, but it got delayed after the US expressed concerns that the political turmoil may jeopardize their peace deal with Taliban. Washington has backed Ghani's victory in the elections. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the recent upsurge in violence in Afghanistan is unacceptable. Speaking in Washington, Pompeo said Kabul and the Taliban should initiate talks on releasing prisoners under the Doha peace deal.
The US-Taliban peace deal calls for the release of 5,000 Taliban detainees, but Afghan President Ashraf Ghani has refused to do so. In response, the Taliban announced the resumption of attacks on Afghan security forces, resulting in violent clashes. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the violence must be stopped for the peace process to move forward. He also termed the ICC's decision to open a probe into Afghan war crimes reckless. The ICC's decision will allow a probe into alleged atrocities committed by the Taliban, Afghan government forces, and the US. Meanwhile, the Taliban have rejected reports suggesting that they have some secret pact with the US. In a tweet, Taliban spokesperson Sohail Shaheen said such rumors are not based on reality.
Moving on, the US says it is encouraged by an agreement on a ceasefire reached between Moscow and Ankara. Earlier, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkey's Tayyip Erdogan agreed on a ceasefire in Syria's Idlib after a 6-hour meeting in Moscow. The State Department said the US is hopeful that the truce will help de-escalate tensions in Syria's Idlib. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has also expressed hope that the latest ceasefire will end fighting across Syria. After the meeting in Moscow yesterday, Erdogan said both Turkey and Russia will work to make the ceasefire in Idlib a lasting one. Erdogan said the two countries will ensure aid reaches the Syrians in need. Putin said he has agreed to continue working with Turkey on Syria as per the Astana format.
As a result of our negotiations, we have agreed on a joint document which will be read by the foreign ministers. It includes the solutions which I and the Turkish President Mr. Erdogan developed during today's consultations, which lasted for over 6 hours.
Following the press conference, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the two sides also agreed to set up a security corridor for Idlib province and hold joint patrols on it. The truce came into effect after midnight in Idlib. Now moving to Syria, whose President Bashar al-Assad says the US Middle East peace plan, the so-called deal of the century, is a stillborn plan. In an interview, al-Assad said Washington's Middle East proposition was made only in time for the next US elections. The Syrian president said those elections will be held at the end of this year, so the idea is meaningless. Assad pointed out that states and governments, even those allied with America and Israel, have rejected the plan. Speaking on Syria, Assad said several foreign companies have found ways to invest in Damascus despite Western sanctions. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has condemned the Muslim world's silence over the killing of Muslims in India and occupied Kashmir. In a tweet, Khan said Western countries are speaking out against Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Hindu supremacist agenda, but not Muslim states. He thanked Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei for condemning the violence against the Muslims. Earlier, Khamenei urged the Indian government to stop Hindu extremists from massacring Muslims. He took to Twitter to deplore the killing of 77 people, mostly Muslims, during protests against the disputed citizenship law. Khamenei said India must stop the violence in order to prevent isolating itself from the Muslim world. Other countries, including Malaysia and Turkey, have also condemned the deadly violence in India. India is planning to hold a global investors summit this month in occupied Kashmir. But there are fears that the summit is a stunt by the ruling BJP to change the region's demography by allotting land to Hindu investors at throwaway prices. More in this report by our correspondent, Imran Khan.
In a first, New Delhi is starting a major exercise to convince Hindu investors across the country to buy land in occupied Kashmir. The BJP government is wooing investors by opening up a 6,000-acre land bank for setting up IT parks, medical complexes and multiplexes. But the land is being offered to Hindu investors at a meager price, and banks are being used to confiscate Kashmiri's properties.
I believe that the relations will be very strained because I think that the Kashmiri Muslims understand that it is a very bad deal. Once they surrender these lands, which they had tried to get through the Article 370 and the ownership that would be exclusively for the local residents, surrendered to foreigners now, they won't be able to get it back ever again. And their legitimacy of territorial right there would be undermined with capitalism coming in and using those resources for foreign gains, New Delhi's gains.
In Srinagar alone, over 20,000 canals have been earmarked for Hindu investors for just 1 Indian rupee per canal. It has been learnt that Hindu investors have been allotted over 2,000 properties which originally belonged to Kashmiri businessmen. Experts say the Indian government is trying to replicate Israel's actions in the West Bank here in the occupied valley.
This is kind of not a new initiative. Such initiatives India had tried to take in the past as well, but they failed miserably. As a matter of fact, I see some kind of a similarity between what has been about the latest peace plan related to Palestine, where it is being said that, you know, in return for the package or some developmental activity will take place in Palestine, which has been strongly rejected by the people of Palestine. Same is the case with the Indian annexed Kashmir.
Prolonged shutdowns and a months-long ban on the internet have resulted in huge economic losses for the region. According to the Kashmir Chamber of Commerce, local businesses have suffered a loss of around $2.5 billion since the 5th of August. Reporting for Indus News, Imran Khan, Islamabad.
In Bangladesh, around 12 people have been wounded in a protest against the upcoming visit of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Police say 4 officers were wounded in a clash with protesters in the southern island of Hatia. Hundreds of protesters on the remote island blocked a busy road and chanted slogans against the Modi government. Police baton charged the protesters, who retaliated with bricks, bats and stones. Modi is due in Bangladesh on March 17th. Dhaka has come under criticism for sending an invitation to Modi, who is widely perceived as anti-Muslim. Opposition parties have strongly condemned the recent killings in Delhi during communal riots. The City of London Corporation has revoked an honour granted to Aung San Suu Kyi over the treatment of minority Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. Elected representatives on the body running London's historic centre and financial district voted to revoke the freedom of the city granted to Suu Kyi 3 years ago. Officials said the decision reflects the city corporation's condemnation of humanitarian abuses in Myanmar. The move comes after Suu Kyi's appearance at the International Court of Justice in The Hague in December. Suu Kyi defended Myanmar at the highest human court against allegations of rape, arson and mass killings of Rohingya Muslims. In January, the ICJ ordered Myanmar to prevent the genocide of Rohingya people in Rakhine. In China, for the first time, no cases of new coronavirus have been reported in Hubei province, outside the capital of Wuhan, where the disease originated. China's National Health Commission says all 126 new cases in the province were in Wuhan. Elsewhere in the world, the fatalities continue. More in this report.
The new coronavirus has infected over 97,000 people in more than 80 countries. In China, 143 new cases have been reported, with 30 new deaths, taking the toll to 3,042. Britain and Switzerland reported their first deaths from the outbreak, while Bosnia and South Africa confirmed their first cases. The World Health Organization has warned that several countries are not doing enough to fight the outbreak.
We are concerned that some countries have either not taken this seriously enough or have decided there is nothing they can do. We're concerned that in some countries, the level of political commitment and the actions that demonstrate that commitment do not match the level of the threat we all face. This is not a drill.
Saudi Arabia has reopened the Great Mosque in Mecca after it was closed for sterilization. The kingdom also suspended the year-round Umrah pilgrimage. Meanwhile, Salvador's health workers are applying disinfectant at the international airport in an effort to head off the novel coronavirus.
This liquid is to be applied as protection against bacteria, viruses, fungi, and certain elements that may at some point generate complications. It is also important to emphasize that it is effective against coronavirus.
Canada has announced 9 new cases, bringing the national total to 45. In the US, Congress has voted for an $8.3 billion emergency funding package to fight the coronavirus as the death toll rises to 12.
More on the new coronavirus outbreak. In Iran, a health ministry spokesperson has reported 15 more deaths from the new coronavirus, raising the death toll to 107. In a televised speech, he said there were 591 new cases of infected people in the last 24 hours, pushing the total number of infections to over 3,500. Earlier, the health minister announced all schools and universities will be closed until the end of the Iranian calendar year on 20th March. A number of senior Iranian officials have contracted the virus. Among the latest is the head of the emergency medical services, Pir Hussein Kolevand. Globally, more than 95,000 people have been diagnosed with COVID-19. Meanwhile, Iran has temporarily released more than 54,000 prisoners in an effort to combat the spread of the disease in crowded jails. Judiciary spokesman said the inmates were allowed out of prison after testing negative for COVID-19 and posting bail. Saudi Arabia has slammed Iran for granting Saudi citizens entry amid the coronavirus outbreak. In a statement, the foreign ministry urged Tehran to reveal the identities of all Saudi nationals who had visited since the start of February. Citing an official source, the statement accused Iran of allowing Saudi citizens entry to its territories without stamping their passports. It says Iran acted irresponsibly, which makes tracking virtually impossible. The ministry said the citizens will be subjected to law forbidding travel to Iran if they do not declare their visits in 48 hours. Saudi Arabia has reported 5 cases of the COVID-19. 4 of them were citizens who had recently visited Iran. Iraq has long relied on tourism revenue from foreign pilgrims visiting its many shrines. But the country has been losing this business because of the violent anti-government protests raging in the country since 2019. Now the coronavirus outbreak has made things even worse. More in this report.
Until last year, Najaf was a bustling city with a thriving hospitality industry. Today, there isn't a single foreigner or pilgrim in sight. To control the coronavirus, Iraq's government has banned foreign pilgrims from entering the country, effectively shutting the local economy down.
All life is at a standstill, not just hotels. Hotels are dependent on foreign tourists from Iran, Pakistan, India and the Gulf. But right now, everything is frozen. Not just in Najaf, but also Karbala and the whole of Iraq has been affected by the coronavirus.
4,000 people working in Najaf's hospitality sector have already been laid off from their jobs. But things have been deteriorating since before the virus scare. In October, news that 500 people had been killed in violent anti-government protests scared off pilgrims from neighboring Muslim countries. With unemployment rising further, these demonstrations could intensify.
In total, some 4,000 people working in the hospitality sector have lost their jobs, but also in other sectors, because when a hotel doesn't operate, other services automatically don't have any work.
The crisis has been exacerbated by the country's political vacuum. On Monday, caretaker Prime Minister Adel Abdel Mahdi announced he would no longer be performing most of his duties. Tourism is a key industry in the cities of Karbala, Baghdad and Samarra, which are also home to holy shrines.
We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. The EU says serious differences remain between the bloc and the UK after the conclusion of the first round of trade talks. The bloc's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, said difficult issues have to be resolved, but a good agreement for both sides is still possible. He said competition rules, police cooperation and deal enforcement remain contentious. Brussels insists on keeping EU standards as a reference point in trade agreement, but London calls it a dynamic alignment by another name. Both sides set out their respective positions in opposition strategy documents last month.
Constatons des convergences.
In this first round, the British tell us that they always have this ambition of a high standard as we have it ourselves, but there are two difficulties. The British do not want to translate these commitments into a joint agreement, nor do they want appropriate mechanisms to ensure respect of it on both sides.
Il y a beaucoup de divergences.
Talks move to London later this month for the second round. Now in U.S. presidential elections, Senator Elizabeth Warren has ended her presidential campaign after a poor showing on Super Tuesday. The Massachusetts senator was a favorite of the liberal left and had been a front-runner in the Democratic field. The contest is now seen as a two-horse race between former Vice President Joe Biden and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Warren said she needed some time to reflect on who to support. With her departure, a Democratic race that began with a record number of female candidates is now left with two male frontrunners. Senator Warren called her supporters to highlight what the campaign had already accomplished. A Virgin Media database breach has affected 900,000 people as their data was left unsecured and accessible online for 10 months. The company says the breach was not due to a hack or a criminal attack, but because the database was incorrectly configured. It said the data did not include any passwords or financial details. The firm was alerted to the problem after it was spotted by an independent security researcher. Virgin Media Chief Executive Lucy Kohler said the company immediately solved the issue by shutting down access. In India, 13 people have been killed after a car rammed into an SUV on a highway near the southwestern district of Tumakuru. Police say 5 others were injured in the accident, which happened when the driver lost control. Officials say the car was approaching on the wrong side of the highway. They said people traveling in the SUV were from Hosur in Tamil Nadu. Police say they have opened an investigation. In the Gaza Strip, 10 people have been killed and 60 others injured in a bakery fire that engulfed a crowded market in a refugee camp. In a statement, the Palestinian Health Ministry said 4 children and 3 women were among the dead. Witnesses say they heard an explosion in a bakery in the Nusayrat camp in central Gaza. They said the blaze quickly spread to nearby stores, factories, and cars parked along the street. Israel maintains a blockade of the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian enclave is home to 2 million people. Indigenous people make up to 2% of Argentina's population of 43 million. They are limited to far-flung areas of the country where water, pollution, unhygienic conditions, and malnutrition are killing their children. Let's look at the situation in this report.
Argentina has around 18 different indigenous groups who remain invisible in mainstream society. Most live in remote parts of the country where they are deprived of life's basic necessities. This includes the Wichi community, who suffer from lack of clean water, availability of food, and pollution. 8 of its children have died within the last month. Local hospital beds are filled with children battling malnutrition and other health issues. Hospital authorities say malnutrition is not the only issue. The children are also suffering from diarrhea.
There are children that have problems. They have diarrhea, they vomit and lose weight. There are times that they are taken to Tartagal and recover there, but when they return, the problem returns because of the water. This is not safe water.
The community also has one of the highest rates of infant mortality in the country.
The place they use as a water source is already either contaminated or has high standards of salinization or even chemical products from the extraction site at very shallow depths, or because they store the water in containers that have been used before for chemicals associated with agriculture, which cause them to have many gastrointestinal diseases, diarrhea, malnutrition, and above all, dehydration.
Indigenous people face an appalling plight all over Argentina.
The situation is a disaster on all levels. Education, health, access to jobs, access to water, life expectancy, infant mortality, malnutrition, everything. There is no good news. What can be done? There is no long-term plan, not a short-term plan, which is what constantly happens.
The country is also struggling with the financial depression. Inflation hovers at above 50% and the poverty rate is currently at 35.4%. The country's indigenous communities, who have been economically vulnerable historically, have been especially hard hit.
In Mexico, conflict fueled by the drug trade has left tens of thousands of people in secret unmarked graves. The families of these missing persons say the authorities have taken little action over the issue. One group of activists has turned to drone technology to address the problem themselves. More in this report.
Mexico is one of the most violent countries in the world. Since 2006, an escalating drug war between rival cartels has resulted in the deaths of over 115,000 people, as well as the disappearance of at least 60,000 others, most of whom end up in unmarked graves.
These are places where members of organized crime groups hid bodies of kidnapped and murdered people. Normally, we come to these places to search and locate human remains.
Desperate for closure, one group of parents affected by this tragedy are using drones to find as many of these graves as they can. They say northern Mexico has seen so much carnage over the years, its entire landscape is changing because of these mass burial sites.
We compare drone images with photographs from previous years and we can see the differences in the land today. Discoloration changes in the earth, constructions, mounds of stones or dirt.
This is a dangerous job. Not only do these people risk drawing the wrath of ruthless drug cartels, but also the Mexican police and military, who have often used extrajudicial methods in the country's long war on drugs. Most tragically of all, none of this has been able to put a dent in the growing power of these criminal groups.
OPEC agrees to an output cut of 1.5 million barrels per day for the second quarter to support prices amid the coronavirus outbreak. Iranian Oil Minister Birjan Zangane confirmed this in a press briefing after a meeting of OPEC ministers in Vienna. He said the ministers want non-OPEC allies to contribute cuts of 500,000 barrels per day out of the total 1.5 million. But Russia, the biggest non-OPEC producer, still needs to signal its approval. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.